Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Mind 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be going back into the book called Octunnumi by Trevor Allen Forrest. Excuse me. If you can, please hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. And we're going to get into this. So, grab your snack, grab your drink, sit back, relax. Alright, reluctantly making his way from behind the imposing reception desk at which he stands, Harold Nolan mutters irritably at the relentless banging. Waddling slightly, he negotiates his large, squat form down the narrow hallway. The dark green walls, hung with posturing portraits, expand and contract to accommodate his girth. Distorted, the skirtings and edge of the floorboards before popping back into shape as he passes. Strange, he thinks. He never used to make the walls move. Given that the hall dimensions are set to allow his frame and his frame only to maneuver up and down without restriction, Harold reluctantly accepts that his hips could possibly have become wider since he last had reason to patrol these walls. And whilst there is no doubt that the restricted single file only access is a necessary security measure, with talk of the 1812 storming of the building still echoing in the corridors, he makes a mental note to himself that next time he should be a fitness fanatic and not a foodie. However, that was what he had said last time. Currently, in his late 50s, Harold has held his post as commissioner for 143 years and has rarely been required to actually open the door. Harold's role being more of an aesthetic one, which he embraces fully, wearing with immense pride the dress of the old guard to which he is aligned, although most of the paraphernalia, gizmos, and gadgets that adorn the smart top hat and frock coat are mostly for show nowadays. It does lend an air of authority, is of an excellent standard, and thanks to the hours spent oiling, cleaning, and polishing, is all in good working order. But it was his waistcoats to which he gave the most attention, a chance for self-expression. Today's choice being a rich, multicolored paisley, one of his trademark styles. Harold glances at his pocket watch while trying to recall when he had ever heard anyone knock on this particular door. He has not the sort of door, it was not the sort of door you would notice. One of the numerous immaculate yet identical black doors set in identical white painted stone with identical iron railings that made up this pristine Georgian block. Similarly, one would not feel inclined to climb any of the short flights of identical steps that approached any one of the said doors, or the need to stand under any of the identical balconies, grandly supported by identical carved pillars. Moreover, this being supported only one of a few that were in fact actual doors and not a facade, made the situation all the more unusual. Of course, if you belonged, then the door yielded, but only to those who were meant to be here. Those wanting entry were well versed in the protocol. Before you were even within a few yards, your identity would be known. By the time your palm was pressed against the solid door, your entire history would have been recalled, and while the door slowly began to open, and the inner walls expanded and or contracted to your frame, even your great-grandmother's favorite color would have been known. So who, Harold wonders as he reaches the end of the hallway, is even able to knock at this door? If you are not in the system, then no sound can be made no matter how hard you try. So it must be someone known in order to make that noise. Passing his palm over the door, a section of the dense black door becomes transparent, certain in the knowledge that this transparency is one way. Harold views a young woman, dark hair, pulled up, slightly built, supporting a man, taller and of similar age and stature. The latter appears to be in great distress, Harold notes. The young woman continues to hammer on the door, all the while looking furtively around the busy street, passerbyers oblivious to them and the commotion being made. Harold contemplates the unfamiliar faces before him. The girl is in her late teens, the boy perhaps early 20s. Their dress not of today's style. He wears a high-collared, long coat, and her preference is a neat jacket over layered skirts, late 1800s in style, but with a modern twist, a little ordinary and not to Harold's liking, but at least it has style, panache, and not the dreadful, lackluster attire of today's fethrist, and, he notes, is not dissimilar to the alliance apparel. The choice of the clothes, he muses, would indicate that they may well be linked in some way to the Octunnumi, Tarlians, who have chosen to leave, would have memories, although diluted, of their past lives and time here, and were often drawn to a certain period and style in an attempt, albeit subconsciously, to make sense of their current incarnation. Although the sound is not penetrating the door, Harold can see the young woman is shouting for help, struggling to keep her charge upright as he slumps toward the door. She fumbles in her coat pocket, then, adjusting her hold of the young man, she slams her open palm to the door, revealing a small icosralis, closed now, the sphere's rings pressed flat between her fingers and the door, the markings etched into the burnished black metal rings, glowing softly. Recognizing it immediately, Harold presses his hand to the door, which instantly evaporates, allowing the man, now unconscious, to collapse toward him. Hold. Madrin Loretti Trincity, chief operative of the Alliance Contuition team, studies the images before her while walking around a now motionless scene. The young woman, her arms thrust forward, having released the person she had been supporting, and Harold, reaching to catch him. Turning, she says, "Continue, slow," and watches the earlier scene being played out around her. A moment before the door reappears, the girl says something, turns, and walks briskly away. Hold back and hold. The young woman's image is again static. Did we manage to track her? Unfortunately not, ma'am. Reginald Passius, a Trousseau, aka Mr. Ward, Madrin's aide, steps into the scene. Both the title of Mr. and the use of the Fethris ancient surname, an indication of the time spent in that insomid, was a privilege not everyone made use of. Regional, however, most definitely did. At 55, immaculate from head to toe, his smart jacket and pencil skirt, manicured and painted nails, pristine hair and makeup are in stark contrast to Majorin's bohemian freefall. Right. And do we know what she said? Ma'am? Mr. Ward replies, eyeing her bare feet. Here, Madrin points to the girl, bringing his attention back to the image. Replay the last 3 seconds, slow, she instructs. As the scene again plays out, she says, there, the girl. She says something just as she lets go. I'm afraid not, ma'am. Pull back. Margarine waves her arm to clear the images, sending her bangles into a frenzy as she does, causing Mr. Ward to grimace slightly. The scene retreats to reveal what was once the former withdrawing area, now serving as one of the many meeting rooms with the Octunnumi, absent-mindedly repositioning one of the 13 chairs placed around the central table. Margarine notes that Mr. Ward, judging by his face, is as equally unimpressed by her summer of love outfit as he is with her feet, the flowers painted on her cheeks probably not helping. I was at a music festival, she offers by way of an explanation. Quite, ma'am. Feeling like a wayward child despite her current 48-year incarnation, she continues, I was hoping to return. Mr. Ward's features remain unchanged. Abandoning her attempts to placate him, she turns and walks to one of 3 heavily draped windows overlooking the large private garden, substantial considering its location, having been achieved by consolidating the back-to-back yards of the surrounding houses that collectively now make up the Octunnumi headquarters. The early evening sun cast long shadows over the clipped lawn and neat trees. Someone, she considers, has been messing with her view. And we opened the door because, she continues. Well, ma'am, Mr. Ward replies. She knocked, ma'am. It's a door, Mr. Ward, she sighs. People knock at doors, frustrated and certain that it is Mr. Ward who is responsible for the change of scenery. She taps one of the multiple small rectangular windows, and the garden evaporates to reveal the atrium that shares this space and time with the garden and surrounding buildings, such camouflage being a necessary measure since the establishing of the permanent presence here. From the window, Margarine can see neither the lower levels nor the top. So vast in her world, and yet, compared to home, so very, very small. She is lost for a moment in the immense beauty of it, the sienna sky flooding through the glass roof, casting a warm glow over the interior. The kaleidoscope of architectural style, borrowed from the multitude of ages, cultures, and worlds from the across all insomnids, blended together in this multicultural world, structures with no restrictions, impossible elsewhere, competing for space, twisting turrets, jutting out at impossible angles into midair, encased in spiraling blackened iron and brass staircases, fantastically curving bridges and balconies linking with each other over the void, while grass spheres encompassed in elaborate metalwork fluidly navigate the buildings, bridges, and each transporting people to and fro, and all the while the light shimmering on the elaborate mechanical levers, pulleys, cogs, and wheels that allow her city to operate. Her children thought this and the interlocking structures sweeping out from the atrium that made up various sectors of the Octunnumi, a chaotic warren of a time and place that didn't happen. She supposed they were right, but it was this fusion that set them apart from others. Everything in their world required nothing more than thought to create. Subsequently, the love of all things that involve hands-on abilities had become an obsession, with the mechanical proving the most popular. This made for some interesting, though largely unnecessary inventions, but that was the whole point of being here on this planet, wasn't it? The challenge of making our world work here had always been the attraction and complete lack of thought to things, the need to actually make things work, to create possible in the impossible. Of course, the skills did not extend itself to living things. That was, after all, why they came, and ironically why they were still here. Margarine loved this little piece of home, the beauty of its buildings combined with the elegant workings. Her husband likened it to living inside a wind-up clock. The knock could be heard, ma'am. Mr. Ward pauses. Ma'am, he repeats. The knock could be heard this side quite clearly. So she must have been known to us, Margarine continues, to gaze out of the window, not ready to break away from the view. How else would she have been able to be heard? The sun would set soon. The pinpricks of twinkling lights would start to pierce the darkness at the evening Octunnumi ceremony. would begin. This was without question her favorite time of the day. The transportation bobbing around and the lights like stars. She had this, ma'am. Margarine could never understand Mr. Ward's fascination with vegetables, flowers, and trees. It was not, after all, something they didn't have in abundance. Left to Mr. Ward, however, she would be looking at an allotment. Now animals, Margarine smiles at the little mechanical mouse at the base of the window as he stretches, rubs his ears and whiskers before scampering away, whirling slightly as he goes. Now they were special. Ma'am, unable to put it off any longer, she turns. I can assure you that all security measures were met, ma'am, he adds, offering her the Ecos Rallius, its etching now dull against the ebony surface. Harold only acted when she held this to the door. An Ecos Rallius? Margarine asks. Yes, ma'am, he replies, handing the device to Margarine. I think you will find it's an original. So much of the Taurian language had been lost over the years, neither by design nor intent, just another example of how the Onistician way of life was being adapted into a universal understanding across the Inosomites. Idly turning the item, she instinctively reaches for the Ecos Relice hanging from her neck, slightly larger but fundamentally the same. The descending rings all neatly positioned inside each other, hers too, with the protection stone jet at its center. This was with no doubt, she considers while opening the device to its full spherical shape, not the distant gear teeth forming the outer ring, as Mr. Ward had rightly suggested, original, developed for use where their own sensory guidance system may be weakened or undermined. These spheres were assigned to the bearers for life, all lives only being relinquished if the owner chose not to be connected to the Octunnumi. It served as their protective shield, a link to this Inismod, a personal navigation device. It acknowledged their place within their world, all worlds. It was their way home. Of course, their ancestors, finding themselves stranded here, had attempted to recreate them for subsequent generations, but with their abilities fading as fast as their memories, armillary, gyroscope, compass had all derived from the Ecos Rallis. Even the cog function of the outer ring had been introduced to the Fethris. Although not recognizing for their importance, cogwheels did reflect the same meaning, to be part of something greater than oneself, but none had replicated the functions and complexities of the Ecos Rallis. Margarine considers the dials and the rings that crisscross each other as she moves them into position, an action that should have triggered the central disk to spin and the markings on the external cog wheel to glow. If she were to believe that this was an original, and that it, as it was demonstrating, only gave guidance to the rightful owner, then who? And the boy, she asks. He is with Miss Fioneth now. Mr. Ward replies. Good, she nods. And? He hesitates slightly. According to our records, ma'am, he is the son of Edgar Fosbit. What? Professor Edgar Fosbit, ma'am, the founder of the Octunnumi Alliance. I know who Edgar Fosbit is, Mr. Ward, she cuts in. Are you sure it's Nicholas? Most definitely, ma'am, although his chosen name is now Nathaniel. He has, of course, retained the family name of Fosbit. If that is the case, she asks, glancing down at the Ecos Realis, how is he in possession of this, and why did it not open the door for him? While I cannot be sure at this present time, ma'am, my assumption would be that it was assigned to him via a third party, and so reducing its effectiveness, she adds. Quite, ma'am. Raising his hand to his temple, he says, If I may, ma'am? Of course, she nods. Accessing Master Fosbit, he murmurs, as he lightly touches the side of his hand. Flicking his fingers forward, images appear and hang in mid-air, each depicting moments of a boy's life through the mid-1800s. We have managed to collect a small historical collection from the Fosbit records, ma'am, he continues as he captures images, colorful and playful as are suspended, motionless before them. These are the moments from memories. Splaying his hands and pulling forward images as he speaks, Mr. Ward indicates each picture in turn. Son of Fethris, Inosomid, Amun Narainiths, Professor Edgar Fosbit and his wife, Marie. He says, enlarging the image of a proud couple holding a baby boy, brother to Sarah May, of course. We are more familiar with her Terrene name, Kedison. He pauses, pulling forward one of a girl of perhaps 14 years of age, towering over her sibling as she playfully ruffles his hair. She being 2 years his senior, and younger sister Abigail, he pauses for a moment, lost in an image of the young girl of 8 or 9, then, clearing his throat, he continues brusquely, the family, he says, bringing forward an image of the 5 together. Edgar and Nathaniel, now a young man, shake hands while Cadison, on tiptoes, kisses his cheek, and little Abigail at his side tugs at his jacket. Marie, tearfully with monogrammed hanky in hand, smiles as she dabs her eyes. As you know, Mr. Ward continues, was granted Tarlene status, thereby acquiring regenerative abilities when Nathaniel was 18. However, when Nathaniel turned 20, he chose to live in Fethris, thereby turning his back on his training, the Octunnumi and the Alliance. He trails off, while pulling an image forward of Cadison, hugging her brother while Marie struggles to hold her smile. Edgar is nowhere to be seen, and neither is Abigail, thus relinquishing his skills acquired via his training here. But, of course, retraining, retaining the ability to heal or regenerate when the need arose. As he finishes, Mr. Ward takes a step back to allow Margarine a full view of the images. Love, she says after a while of studying them. Ma'am, it was love. Turning to him, she continues. He fell in love with an Amunarithian, a next-gen. She refused the Taurelian life, so he gave it up for love. Very noble, I am sure. He brushes away imaginary dust from his jacket. You sound a little terse, Mr. Ward. Do you not approve? It's really not for me to say, ma'am, he replies, straightening his shoulders, clearly having something to say. But if it were? Well, ma'am, he says without hesitation, we here at the Alliance are charged with the well-being and safety of many insomnids, of many beings. We were chosen, ma'am. I hardly think we were chosen, Mr. Ward. We are, after all, responsible. Forgive me, ma'am, he chips in, but I disagree. Without our abilities, there would be no alliance, no order, no protection. We are the only ones who can carry out the task. Your point, Mr. Ward? Margarine cuts in, sighing with resigned irritation. They had been here many times before, and much as she liked to challenge Mr. Ward's distorted views on the history of the Alliance and how it came to be, now was not the time to do it again. My point, ma'am, he stresses, is that some people just do not appreciate what they have. Master Fosbit disowned the Octunnumi, turning his back on his family and friends, his calling. His father was devastated, never truly recovered. What followed was a mass exodus. He pauses, trying to calm his growing agitation. Margarine considers mass exodus a slight overstatement, and given the events around that time, Nathaniel could hardly be held responsible. However, observing the usual unruffled Mr. Ward, with his flushed cheeks and furrowed brow, she lets it go. Master Forbit, he resumes, as he starts to pace the room, was one of the best, a shining star amongst the recruits, and he threw it all away. Surely, Mr. Ward, after what happened to the children, his younger sister, was he not entitled to some happiness? Well, of course, ma'am. He hesitates, clearly hurt at the suggestion that he would wish anything else. Fully aware that Mr. Ward had recommended and been instrumental in the Fosbit family being given Terrellian status, the first recorded crossover between two life forces, Margarine also knew that Mr. Ward had felt personally slighted when Nathaniel decided to leave, not least since Mr. Ward's loyalty to Fosbit Sr. meant that he could no longer mentor the boy. And then there was Abigail. Am I missing something, Mr. Ward? Ma'am? It was you that brought together and trained the original operatives, was it not? Yes, ma'am, it was, he replies proudly. And if I can just assess, she lightly touches her temple. Yes, there it is. Images of Mr. Ward, subjected to a series of pranks, pop into the air and play out before them. A sack of flour Mid-descent from the floor, Mr. Ward in its sights, Mr. Ward complete in nightgown, face pack, and curlers, in hasty retreat from a piglet in his chambers. "Well, Mr. Ward," she says, dismissing the images, "it would appear that they gave you quite a runaround." "I would say that they were full of high jinks, ma'am, yes." Despite himself, a small smile twitches at the corner of his mouth. "I believe my boys were part of that group," she states, wandering back to her desk. "Well, ma'am, he stutters. "Still stings a little, does it, Mr. Ward?" She smiles. "Ma'am, I can assure you that I hold no grudge. But," she pushes, "but I cannot pretend that I was not disappointed by Nathaniel's actions, throwing away all his training for a next gen after making the decision to reconnect in the first place." He pauses. "I am of the belief that it was his decision to leave which triggered the breakup of the original team, ma'am." This was not, as they both knew, entirely accurate, but Margarine had no wish to open up old wounds. "Do you have a problem with next gens, Mr. Ward?" "Absolutely not, ma'am," he counters, offended at the suggestion. Nathaniel had much potential. He could have done great things." "Do you think that he did just that, Mr. Ward?" "Do you not think he did just that, Mr. Ward? Great things?" she asks as she walks to the images of Nathaniel's life. To the untrained eye, the collection of newspaper clippings, images, and articles would be no more than an historical collection of archives and failures of the Fospit males throughout the decades. The articles, photos, and footage chronicling the events across time would not indicate any connection other than sharing of a surname. But if you knew what to look for, the similarities of build, stature, looks, even the choice of the first name, it all pointed to a Tyrillian, and these, albeit each regime having a slightly different look, were quite definitely all Nathaniel. "We don't have much, of course," Margarine adds, "only the public records, but still." Tapping a newspaper headline, she scrolls through the clippings, pulling closer the picture of Nathaniel's wedding day, as reported by the daily news sheets of the time. Debutante marries high-flying entrepreneur. "Sweet Melissa," she says fondly, lightly touching the image. "Such a lovely girl." Continuing, Margarine scrolls through further news coverage reciting the couple's patronage to orphanages, donations, business achievements, honors, stopping at Melissa's obituary as Mr. Ward interrupts. "Ma'am, it would appear that Master Fospit did contribute somewhat to the next-gen existence." He steps forward and scrolls to more recent times. He also took full advantage of his healing and regeneration abilities. Frequently, he says, pulling forward another collection of newspaper headlines. "Man lost in rapids. Regeneration 1, Mr. Ward counts. Flight of death, body not found. Regeneration 2. He continues, and again. Tragedy at Rockface. Regeneration 3. And I think you have made your point, Mr. Ward. Margarine cuts in. Even so, you cannot deny that he has done nothing but good in Fethris, even with his choice of activities. Yes, ma'am, but think of what he could have done here with his skills instead of struggling to find the words. He stops at the clipping. Man still missing following mountain climb. Throwing it all away for love? She asks, grinning. Exactly, ma'am. Have you ever been in love, Mr. Ward? She sighs, moving around the images, spreading her hands to allow them to be more clearly displayed. I do not believe I have, ma'am, no. Ever come close? Margarine steps back to take in all the information now on view. Just never found the right person, ma'am. Perhaps you are looking in the wrong places, Mr. Ward. I like to think I am vigilant, ma'am. I'm not sure, she laughs, glancing back at him. That vigilance is quite the right emotion, Mr. Ward, ma'am. Perhaps you should lighten up a bit, have fun. Not entirely sure that he understands the term fun. She shimmies her shoulder. Dance a little. Yes, ma'am. His reply as stiff as his composure. Right, she sighs. Turning her attention back to the display, she continues. Has his family been notified? Contact requests have been issued to both the professor and Miss Caddison, ma'am, but as you know, Fosbit Sr. became something of a recluse after Abigail. He pauses. More so since the sad loss of his lady wife. Of course, she acknowledges. Returning to the clipping of Nathaniel's wedding day, I see that he never married again, Nathaniel. No, ma'am. It appears that he never found Miss Melissa again. It happens, she nods. Sometimes next gen remember past lives and reconnect, but rarely, ma'am. Yes, she nods. Children? No, ma'am. It is not possible for the two life forces to procreate. Yes, of course. Embarrassed by the slip, she continues to scroll through the images. She missed the children. Not for herself, of course. She had been one of the lucky ones. But the presence of children was refreshing, and their absence in the Octunnumi, a constant reminder that since being locked to this planet, all reproduction here had ceased. Even so, children brought new outlooks, new thoughts, fresh ideas, as Tyrellians carrying your thoughts from lifetime to lifetime, regardless of how many bodies you inhabited. You were always you, and not always willing to learn from your previous self. And all the time Margarine had been here, the numbers within the Octunnumi had not significantly altered. Final death was rare, and was either by choice or sudden, thereby not allowing the person to regenerate. Some, like Nathaniel, had chosen to leave, of course, but then the recruiting system filled any gaps. Have you accessed his thoughts? She asked, turning to Mr. Ward. He is still unconscious, ma'am, he replied. Yes, of course, she sighed, perplexed by the return. Perplexed. She returned to the images. Is there anything else? Yes, ma'am. She turns to face him. What is it? Faltering only slightly, he removes the envelope from his inside breast pocket and hands it to her. It's addressed to you, ma'am. Me. Looking down at the envelope, she notes the crispy typed letters for the attention of Margarine McAllister. She notices at her colleague. She glances at her colleague. My Fithris name. Yes, ma'am. I take it it's safe. It would not have passed the door if it were not, ma'am. Mr. Ward nods. Who else knows about this? Handing the ecos relice back to him and breaking the wax seal. The envelope? Just myself, ma'am. The card she removes is plain. There are no markings on the back or front. Inside, a fading photo. Its corners held by the small cuts in the paper shows a group of children picnicking in the park. Margarine studies the picture closely. Her head snaps back. The color drains from her face. Hurriedly, she makes for the door. Shut it down, she utters, gesturing towards the images. Keep Nathaniel quarantined and allow no one other than Fioneth near him unless on my say-so. Understand? As she heads for the door, the flowing skirts, bangles, scarves, beads, earrings transform with each step. She finishes buttoning the high neck of her fitted jacket while the last of her loose, dark hair piles high on her head, her fringe stopping just short of the bridge of her nose, her booted feet kicking at her flared trousers, while echoing across the wooden floor, now fully transformed into the official recognized dress of the Alliance Continuity team she has, before reaching the door, gone. And that is, my dear friends, where we are going to leave it today. I hope that you enjoyed it, and please hit that like button and that subscribe if you aren't already. And as always, this is Ruby, signing off.